This theme, we're going to be focusing on preparing for program evaluation success, understanding your options. I'll try to make it brief, but I included slides from the publisher. I edited some slides and some slides that I found, so it's pretty dense, but hopefully I can get through with this presentation within about 20-25 minutes. I'll probably use this slide each week until the end of the course to kind of make sure you're focusing on customizing your own working definition of program evaluation. I know the first week we kind of talked about what program evaluation is, how you've used it or how you've seen it used, and now that you're applying some of these principles, I want you to think in your own respective lens on what program evaluation means to you and how it can be implemented in your specific area with respect to teaching and learning. As we go through the process of developing your program evaluation plan, I want you to use this slide as a visual of what you're actually going through and the reasons for your evaluation. And now at this phase we've done assignment 2, where you've defined the purpose. You're looking at the use of the evaluation and the users. You're actually focusing on the program itself, and hopefully you've established some SMART goals, something that again is measurable and it is time specific. You had a brief taste of program logic and or the theory with dipping your toe into the world of logic models last week, and now we're going to be focusing more on our resources and their time frame and the relevant contextual issues. All of that we're going to be building as we go. Some of the direct informational uses of evaluation are listed here. For those of us working in the arena of teaching and learning, a lot of the non-informational uses of evaluation will really be weaved into our plan. And this is basically program evaluation gone wrong and clearly not the learning objective or learning outcome of this course. And as you look at this slide, you can kind of use this as your checklist for the different factors that you will be using when you're building this evaluation plan over the next couple of weeks with these weekly assignments. Last week you identified the problem or the issue and dimensions of the particular program. We're focusing on the participants, and you may have also included some things about the program settings and the context with your contextual framework, and we're going to keep adding and refining as we go. And again, we'll clearly go through every one of these elements on that list, but this is another visual you can kind of have in your mind what you're going towards. Last week you really focused on the both and for this program description, where you've had the program theory with the assignment, and then we kind of touched into the logic models last week with just a baseline to make sure you understood what a logic model looked like and to help you think big about your program, big and small, about your program and all of the different variables that are going to be needed for you to implement this plan. The next slide will be a short video clip. It should be about 2 minutes on hiring the right. This week's chapter reading is on clarifying the evaluation requests and responsibilities, and we're going to highlight in this mini lecture hiring the right evaluator. One of the first questions you need to ask is an evaluator even needed for this particular program or project? Assuming the answer to the question is yes, here are some suggested guidelines that you use when determining what type of an evaluator is needed and what is going to be asked of that particular evaluator or evaluators that you're going to choose. In addition to using the guidelines, you also need to determine what type of an evaluator do you need. Do you need an internal evaluator, an external evaluator? Do you need both of them? Do you need a team of internal and external evaluators to work together? Do you need them to work separately? There's a lot of different variations and combinations you can use, but you as your evaluation committee team need to determine what combination will work best for you in that particular program that needs to be evaluated. Gene King provided us with the essential competencies for program evaluators, which are also something that I think are important to integrate into the guidelines that were mentioned previously in an effort to help you best determine the standards that you want your evaluator to meet and what competencies does this particular evaluator or evaluators or team of evaluators need to address prior to you even hiring them for the particular job. And in closing, when you're talking about hiring an evaluator, you really have to say, would you trust the information that you're going to receive from this person after you've gone through all the evaluations with the guidelines and the essential competencies? Will you trust their results? And if the answer is yes, then that's the person you would go with. But if the answer is no, or you get that gut feeling that something isn't right with that person or those team of people, then you know what to do. I hope you found this overview helpful with tying in some of the key elements that are highlighted in this week. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about internal and external evaluators. We'll talk in more detail about the divergent phase a little bit later in the lecture, but this is a good way to start the process of thinking about the different types of evaluators and what information is needed and what those respective evaluators will be doing during the project and program evaluation. These next couple of slides, we're going to be reviewing some of the different types of approaches that we learned about last week and what they actually result in and how they can be used. Clearly, nobody wanted to touch decision-oriented approaches during last week's discussion, or everybody is just so enamored with Michael Jackson and the moonwalk, and they just really wanted to go all in on that particular thread. But please make sure you feel comfortable with this particular approach because it may be very applicable to your program evaluation. In all the approaches, having clearly defined program objectives is essential, but it is extremely critical in this particular type of approach. The last approach we'll review is a participant-oriented approach, and if you're not familiar with Guba and Lincoln, make sure you are. They're very key in the world of program and project evaluation. This brings us to, I believe, Chapter 13, and here I've mixed in slides from this lovely scholar as well from the textbook and some of my own, so it's a hodgepodge of things. I open up this lecture with making sure you understood the role of program evaluation because evaluation questions themselves are very critical for the process. Criteria and standards are critical for any successful program evaluation because that is how you determine the effectiveness and efficiency. And the standards can be set internally, or you may also have some external metrics that you're trying to match up against, especially when we're talking about teaching and learning and all of the other outside entities that influence those particular areas. As mentioned before, we're going to look more into divergent and convergent phases. And really making sure that you understand with the divergent phase, it's a comprehensive laundry list or a checklist, if you will, of potential important questions and concerns. Many sources of all these questions are listed. So that's one of the things that you would do for if you chose to use that particular type of approach. From the convergent phase, the evaluator selects from the laundry list of questions the most critical questions to be answered, and the criteria is developed after the convergent phase. So there are two different approaches, and we'll look more into them in the next couple of slides. The sources for the divergent phase are basically all parties. And one of the things I really think is critical with whatever phase you choose is to really make sure you understand who your audience is. And then kind of, to me, I like to build out from there. Who are your customers? Who are the learners? Whatever phrase you want to use, you can use them interchangeably. But who is the intended audience? For assignment number 2, you more or less did an abbreviated version of a needs assessment, and you kind of did a quick pace version of that. And depending on what phase works best for you, you may branch off from there and may not go through this particular line, but all good program evaluations do really start with some formal type of needs assessment. And these are just some basic examples of interview questions that you would conduct with stakeholders. And this is where the different types of approaches would best fit in. Going back to criteria and standards, which are very important for your plan to be implemented properly, really focus on making sure that you lay the proper foundation to create a meaningful and useful evaluation. I'm a big infrastructure person, so when you're conducting and you're developing your plan, really make sure you have laid a solid foundation and that all parties involved, including your stakeholders and the end users, your customers, your learners, and anyone else who plays a role and is directly or indirectly affected by this plan, is involved. And this is just key elements that you need to take into consideration as you're developing your criteria and standards. Make sure you're familiar with the professional standards for program evaluation. They may differ in your respective field. Some of you who are school psychologists, you also have a different set of evaluation standards that you need to adhere to. Those of you who are traditional K-12 educators, there may be some specific standards for you. For those of you who are in corporate, working in governmental agencies, make sure you understand what the evaluation standards are for your respective profession. Realistically, you may want to do a divergent phase, but due to budgetary constraints, time constraints, all you really have time for is a convergent phase because of all of the different variables I just mentioned and others that aren't. So for this particular type of phase, you really need to make sure you work as lean as possible, and you really make sure you have all the key players involved initially to make sure that your foundation and your infrastructure is solid. And these are the different steps that you will conduct during this particular phase. When you're developing your questions, you do need to think about all the stakeholders, and as you try to minimize and customize your questions, you do need to kind of ask yourself as you're going through the elimination process or adding questions, who would be upset? Who needs this information? What would it gain? All those different things that are listed here to help you in the decision-making process. One of the best ways to ensure that you have a solid set of questions and that your plan is well respected by all of the major players is to actually sit down with them with your logic model, your list of questions, and work from a consensus basis so everybody's on board with what was decided and how it will be implemented. And I believe your text provides a matrix for selecting questions. And this leads us right back to criteria and standards. And as you can see, I've kind of weaved this in and out of this particular lecture to really stress to you the importance of establishing this, because it is essential for having a solid foundation and a solid infrastructure for your plan. This last phase is the project selection portion with a twist, and you'll see the twist as we go. I mentioned last week some of my experience with program and project evaluation, and I mentioned that I have a green and a black belt in Lean Six Sigma. And I didn't really explain much about what Lean Six Sigma is, and I'll do that this week. Lean Six Sigma actually derived in manufacturing, and it was really an American concept for manufacturing of vehicles that wasn't fully embraced. So the gentleman moved it to Japan, where it was fully embraced, and car companies such as Honda and Toyota really jumped onto this bandwagon of focusing on reducing waste, defects, errors, things of that nature in a synchronized workflow. So making sure that what is needed for that particular worker on the line is there just in time. There's not a warehouse full of inventory that's sitting there, that you have just enough for that day or maybe the next day, but it's just not a whole bunch of waste going on. And so what has been done is we've taken this concept of Lean Six Sigma out of manufacturing and applied it to basically anything. So any workflow, not just manufacturing, it could be an information flow. So for example, the process of registering. Currently for a student, you have to fill out a form, then get your instructor to sign it, and then I need to take that form and get my department head to sign it. Then that form needs to be walked down to registration. They need to enter it into the system, and then you are registered for a course, I believe, if you do it after a particular period of time. So what Lean Six Sigma would do is saying that's a lot of waste of time for all parties, for the student, for the instructor, the department head, and even for the registrar. How can we lean this process? How can we make this process more effective and efficient for all parties? So in the end user, who is the student who wants to get into the course, is served well in the most effective and efficient manner. So a whole team of projects would go along to figure out where in this workflow process can things be done differently, or maybe even eliminated because they're not really helpful in the overall process and not needed. So those are some of the different types of things that can be done with Lean Six Sigma. And the example I just provided with registering, I believe it's late, when you have to fill out that lovely form and go through all those steps. That's kind of an example of how you can identify and select a project, a Lean Six Sigma project, especially in the world of teaching and learning in higher education. What is a good fit? How does that fit into the strategic plan of the organization? If UTC says that they want to, if it's student first, and this process really isn't lining up with student first, then that may be a good candidate for a particular, for a Lean Six Sigma project here at UTC. When you're identifying the project, I would really, again, make sure you understand the strategic plan and the mission of the particular school, the district, the organization, the state, whatever it is that you're working for, to make sure that the issue or the problem really addresses that particular strategic plan, to make sure it's a good fit for the time, effort, money, and resources that are going to be allocated for this particular program evaluation and implementation. Dealing in the arena of teaching and learning and all the lovely bureaucracy that comes with it, making sure you understand the policy deployment system is essential, because even if the project or the problem that you identify fits in within the strategic plan, if there is not a particular policy deployment system and plan that is favorable for your outcomes to be implemented, then you've basically wasted your time, the resources, and the funding on a project that was well-meaning and fit, but because of the policy, there was no way that the implementation was actually going to be supported. When you understand the core organization and its processes, it's much easier to identify and select a good project for Lean Six Sigma or for just program or project evaluation in general. Now we're going to look at the different levels in the process performance. Level 1, you have the core organization process that corresponds to an organization function and has accountability and traceability. So you can easily say who's responsible for it and who messed up it as well. Level 2 process is a sub-process of an L1 process that involves a distinctly related sequence of process steps. The work steps, a logical work unit of an L2 or level 2 process that involves a sequence of work tasks and is performed by a person or a small team. So think back to the initial example I gave you with the whole evaluation process, where there's a form that the student initially fills out, the instructor signs it, the department head signs it. It then needs to be walked over to registration. Registration enters that information in to the system, and the student is now enrolled in a course. Think about that, and I'll give you a minute or two for you to think about what is a level 1 in that particular scenario, what's a level 2, and what are the work steps. As I'm introducing the topic of Lean Six Sigma, hopefully you can see how this complements what you've already been learning in the text. I wanted to kind of give you a different way of how it's applied in academia and outside of academia, because you can use Lean Six Sigma principles in higher education and K-12 as well. And also see how some of the terminology we've used from our text corresponds and correlates to the L1s, the L2s, the different types of things that we're talking about here. So it's essential in whatever framework you're working on that you understand who the L1s are within a particular organization, as well as the L2s, and make sure that they can be easily identified to make sure that the true work steps are known. Because if you ask, let's say, someone like the provost what the process is for a student to register for a course, they may say, oh, they just go online and they click this, and that, and that's it. And then L2 would say, wait a minute, sir, with all due respect, if a student is registering after a particular date, they have to go through this process. And that adds another level of detail and complexity to what the true work steps are. In all of this, you need to think about what your role is and what expertise are you bringing to the particular project that you're going to evaluate. The success of a Lean Six Sigma project, and frankly any program or project evaluation project, is the champion that's selected and their ability to resolve organizational issues and manage risks to the projects that include resources, time, those who are on the project, all of the different factors that are important for that particular project, and they vary. And so you need to make sure whomever your champion is for this project is well suited to handle all types of issues that will arise, and that they can advocate for things such as more time and more resources, because they truly understand and they're on board with the project, and they understand how the findings from this program evaluation will fit in with a strategic plan, and they can talk to the L1s, the L2s, and the workers and use whatever language that's needed to get all those parties on board with the different risks that do associate from conducting a detailed program or project evaluation. In addition of selecting the proper champion, making sure the champion truly understands what their role is extremely essential. Now think, who can be a champion for your project? Some of you may have something that is very well defined. It's a real project, and you can think of a person, you can name them. Others of you may be working a little bit more loose. It may be fictitious to some extent. So maybe for you, you can describe what that person would be or what role they should have in a particular organization. I also want you to think about your stakeholders this week. As you begin reflecting on who your stakeholders are, also think about what they should be doing and the guidelines that you will use for your stakeholders. This leads us to our discussion, and you're going to be focusing on those two key areas that I'm ending the lecture with identifying your stakeholders and figuring out where they fall on the matrix. And then we're going to try our hand at applying some very basic principles of Lean Six Sigma. Please don't go and tell people you're going to be green belt or black belt certified, but at least I want you to see how you can apply these business principles or these manufacturing principles to your scenario. And I want you to create just a basic case study using this 1, 2, 3 process. I provided resources that help you with that, and also an example of how it may be applied in a teaching and learning type of scenario. And if you prefer to use learners instead of customers, that's fine. Make sure you can customize it for your needs. The other thread for this week is for you to sign up for a midterm one-on-one session with me. Please don't be alarmed. I do this with all of my courses just to check in with my students. Because we meet asynchronously, I want to make sure everybody is on board, they feel comfortable with what is coming down the pike and what we've already done, and if there's times for us to make some course corrections, we can do that at this time. So please use that other thread to sign up for, at least give me a couple of different options, a couple of dates and times for this week and early next week for us to meet for. It shouldn't take us more than 15 minutes. If I'll allow for a 30-minute session, so if you have specific questions that we need to kind of go through and troubleshoot, we can. I don't want you to feel rushed, but typically these particular sessions last no more than 15 minutes. Last but not least, this week's assignment. For this assignment, I'm going to do my part to make sure that for those of you who submit your assignment 2 on time, that you get your feedback quickly, because you're going to use your conceptual framework to list 10 indicators that you propose to measure based on that particular framework.